Board of Education, Dr. Martirano and Ms. Turner-Little. I am Dan Lubley, Director of Capital Planning and Construction and a co-chair for the review of Policy 6010. With me tonight is Ms. Jennifer Bubenko, Planning Specialist in the Office of School Planning, and our other co-chair for Policy 6010. Also joining us on Zoom is Mr. Tim Rogers, our Manager of School Planning. I apologize, this is not progressing to the next slide.
I have to use page up and page down.
All right, thank you. Up to today, the policy has proceeded through the phases as we see here. And we are here tonight to report to the board highlights of the policy review and recommendations for modification to the existing policy. The policy committee had robust conversations regarding each section of the policy over a period of 12 meetings and came to a consensus on their recommendations. The committee's recommendations were reviewed and edited by the policy office, general counsel, and cabinet. Specific coordination was held with Senator Lamb's office regarding related legislation, which is referenced within the policy recommendations. The resulting superintendent's proposed recommendations are being presented in the following slides. We will start with the standards section A, which outlines the conditions that prompt consideration for a boundary review. The recommendations to the considerations include adding the specificity of when available capacity exists to the utilization range, removal of the consideration for alterations in road work, and specifies that unique circumstances could arise from internal or external contributing factors. Standard section B outlines the factors that should be considered during the development of any plan during a boundary review. The recommendation to these considerations include that attendance area adjustment plans are to be evaluated analytically based on the factors identified. Updates to language for several considerations for clarity and identifies where reasonable attendance areas should stay within a utilization range for as long as possible. A consideration was added for condition of school facilities based off of state and local assessments of school facilities. In community stability, updates include maintaining continuity of communities and neighborhoods and limiting the frequency in which one area is reassigned. In the demographic characteristics section, the recommendations include updates to the diversity factors to align with policy 1080, educational equity. Language to broaden the allowable socioeconomic factors by removing the specificity for the use of farms participation and allowing any applicable socioeconomic data. In the Board of Education deliberations section, the recommendations include clarifying the board will direct the superintendent to begin a boundary review process rather than proceed with the formation of an AAC. Adds a section in reference to educational article section 4-138 and complying with the reporting requirements, and provides updates to text in order to clarify types of attendance area plans, that is proposed versus drafts. Further recommended updates of the Board of Education deliberation section include clarifying language about public participation in the board process in accordance with Policy 2040, public participation in meetings of the board, and clarifies that the board can direct the superintendent to develop alternative plans or provide additional information. Alternative plans can be developed by school planning staff or individual board members, and when feasible, these plans will be made public 48 hours before a public hearing. Continuing with the deliberation section, the exemptions the boards may consider during deliberations is provided in a list format and has expanded beyond the 5th, 8th, and 11th grades to include students with IEPs and 504s, and students with at least one active parent or one active duty military parent. Language has also been added to reference Educational Articles Section 4-109-1, which clarifies that the board will hold a public hearing after the superintendent proposed plan. If the board's plan differs from the superintendent's plan, another public hearing will be held. Should the board decide to revise or make a new plan and they reassign areas that were not included for reassignment in the superintendent's plan or a prior board plan for which there has already been an opportunity to participate in a public hearing, another public hearing will be scheduled.
In the community input section, the following recommendations are included. After the board initiates the boundary review process, the superintendent may form an AAC. Also, the language has been clarified regarding community feedback to the superintendent, noting that students, parents, staff, and community members may submit alternative boundary scenarios. Continuing in the community input section, clarification has been added that the community input to the superintendent will be solicited in a variety of methods in a consistent way from each potentially impacted attendance area at the elementary, middle, and high school levels, as well as countywide community feedback. Feedback will be provided to the public in an aggregated, non-identifiable fashion. Also, the language has been specified that as part of the board deliberation process, students, parents, staff, and community members may provide testimony to the board during their deliberations, including the submission of alternative school attendance area adjustment scenarios. In the responsibility section, the following recommendations are included. The Board of Education will define the proposed scope and identify which standards of the policy prompted this attendance area review for the upcoming year's process. The superintendent or designee will obtain student, parent, staff, and community feedback and ensure opportunities for differing viewpoints to be expressed. The superintendent takes summary notes for the attendance area committee or designee, and those notes will be made available to the public. We have one more notes for the responsibility section on this slide, that the board will hold public hearings, work sessions, and approve any changes to school attendance areas in public meetings. This is, of course, how we've done things in the past, but we added it for clarity to identify these major steps which were not listed in this area before. Moving on to the definitions section. Definitions for attendance area adjustment plan, board's final attendance area adjustment plan, board's preliminary attendance area adjustment plan, scenario, and the superintendent's proposed attendance area adjustment plan were all added to clarify that there are there are a variety of different types of plans. Superintendent proposals and board preliminary plans, which would require a public hearing, scenarios, which are draft or working plans that do not require a public hearing, and final plans, as in the board's final approved plan. This was done in order to align with new Education Article Section 4-109-1. Also, the definition for program capacity was updated to reference the board's local methodology to clarify that this capacity utilization is based on the local capacity, not the state-rated capacity. The implementation procedures were updated to align with these policy recommendations. Today, we have brought the report for you here today, and the public hearing is scheduled for November the 2nd, with an action by the board anticipated for December the 7th. The policy would become effective immediately upon board approval. Any modifications to policy 6010 would be reflected in the next attendance area adjustment process, which is scheduled to start at the end of this year, calendar year, for new high school number 13 in Hammond High School. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this report to you this evening. We are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Bobenko and Mr. Lubel. So, board members, please raise your hand if you have any questions. This is the report for tonight, so it's not an action item. Dr. Lu, you go first.
First, I want to thank you and the committee for working on this. I saw that you made lots of ideas, and I especially want to say that I thank you for giving the community opportunity to testify if their polygon got moved, and that was not included in superintendent's proposal, because it gives community a chance to voice out and provide their perspective. I want to thank you and the community for doing this. It's really, really important for the community. Thank you. And another question I have was about page 3 of 12. That's section 3.b. So first, I want to show my appreciation because you set up meetings with us and provide lots of information. Well, thank you for doing that. And I remember that during our meetings, several board members raised the question that for this section 3.b, it was not consistent with the language in other sections. For example, academic performance, we just describe academic performance. But for 3.b, socioeconomic composition, it also have a sentences with the goal of balancing measurable socioeconomic factors across schools. I recall during the meetings, several board members suggest to remove that sentence so the language will be consistent across this section. Yeah,
Yes,
so can you
ma'am, there
look into
was,
that?
yes, I do recall the conversations that we had specifically between B and the consistency with other sections as C, as you pointed out as well. We did take a look at that. We can absolutely look at that again, take that into consideration. As was pointed out, I believe, on some of the previous items tonight, we can take any modifications or suggestions that you have under consideration and bring those forward at our next point for the report as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Cutroneo?
This is about our goal of, I forget, it was 95 to 110% is our capacity utilization rate, which is kind of not in agreement with our goals for APFO. I'm wondering, was there discussion about why we are putting those numbers in our policy? Because it kind of holds our feet to the fire when we're talking about capacity and funding, when they say, oh, well, you're within 110%, but that 105% at the elementary level is our goal for, under APFO. So I'm just wondering if there was, it just seems like it's always been in the policy, and have we thought about this and how it might impact the conversations and the narrative on what the school system needs?
Yes, ma'am. There's been a lot of conversation with regards to the capacity range. And Mr. Rogers is on Zoom if we would like to get into a little more detail.
Would he like to chime in? I would love to hear his perspective.
Well, before Mr. Rogers chimes in, one thing I would like to equate is, while the ranges are very similar, they are meant for different items.
I know that, but they get taken out of context
Yes,
outside
ma'am.
of the school system, and so I totally understand why we do that. But with other things get hijacked into a different narrative.
Understood, absolutely. Yeah. And part of the conversation that we've had with regards to this range is, even within the policy, you'll notice that there are two numbers under B. One is the 90 to 110 and the 90 to 100, which, as you point out, also get confused a lot of the times. But again, they also have different purposes of being in there. So, Mr. Rogers, if you have any further clarification you'd like to provide, I do want to remind you, just be short with your answers if you could, as we're short on time here for the board.
I have nothing additional, Mr. Luber. You summarized it nicely. Thank you.
That was really succinct. Thank you. I guess my question is, do we need to have that in this policy, or is it necessary?
I think it is an important factor. It gives a target, or it gives a range.
Can we clarify that this is not a range that's acceptable for I don't know. I don't know if there's a way to distinguish this, because I know during the legislative session or 2 years ago that this number was thrown around, that we were fine.
We can definitely take a look at it. As Ms. Bubenko noted, in the definition section, we do have a definition for capacity utilization. We can take a further look at that to provide it. One thing I would caution as we look at it is to make sure that we're not adding confusion.
Yes.
If we specifically add a reference to APFO.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Damasmo.
So I think we could probably all come to agreement that we as a school system need more tools in order to deal with how we handle capacity and what we do with our students throughout the redistricting process. I would like to explore adding language for what I refer to as a development polygon, which would be a polygon based on the geographic area of a new residential development. I am not advocating that we necessarily use it. What I am advocating for is that we add this as a tool to give the board additional options when we too come to redistricting, and I can discuss it more with you offline so I don't take up so much time right now.
We'd be happy to meet with you and discuss.
Thank you.
On page, I just have it on page 7 of 12. It's very important that that community members in a certain polygon know that their polygon is up, so to speak, for movement. I would like to add language, and again, to discuss with you later in addition, and with the superintendent, for the superintendent to develop a process to inform parents if their polygon has been slated for redistricting under the superintendent or the board's plan, and then to present this process to the board so that we can have a discussion on it.
Understood.
And my other question, I will hold my questions for now.
Okay. Next, I have a question about that 15% feed issue, because we talk about a small feed problem, right? That how do we come out with that 15%? I forget the history of that.
Mr. Rogers, would you like to provide
Like
a
page
little?
2 of 11, the number 2 from the bottom, like avoiding fees less than 50%. Why not like 33%, 1/3 or something?
That might be an item that we have to investigate, Dr. Wu, to see where that 15% actually came from. And
I
we can look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have other? Okay, Ms. Watts?
I have one question. Has there been any consideration to look at maybe providing kind of a weighting system so that we know, because the way the policy reads is like everything can be considered, right? Everything under item 1. So those 5 different things can be considered. Has there been any thought or conversation around adding kind of a weighting system so we would put more weight towards one thing or the other as we go through the proposed plan, so that we kind of have a little more of an objective conversation about what's moving and what's changing?
Yes, ma'am. During the committee review, there was a lot of discussion regarding a weighted system as well as the analytical. You can see that we do have in here at least the analytical for the analysis or the review. The weighted system, we did have a lot of discussion on. It became very complicated and was very difficult to determine how it would function. As an example, if they're listed by a specific weight and in an order, how does it work if you don't complete the top ones? Do you go on to the next one? So there were a lot of questions that came up in that discussion. We'd be happy to continue the discussion with you. At this point, we were unsure how to implement that thought to put it into the policy, but there was a lot of discussion on that.
Because I guess then my concern would be if we don't have the discussion now to anchor the policy, then we're going to have the same exact conversation outside of the policy, right? Of what constitutes, what priority gets more weight.
Understood. And I think one of the other items that come along with the weight is the decisions of the board. And what I mean by that is the board would have to identify, if it's not identified specifically in the policy, the board as a group would have to identify the specific weights per factor at the outset of the redistricting process. Or the way it is now, if an individual board member comes up with a plan to submit for consideration, an individual board member could identify different weights as well. So there are different aspects to consider within the weighted idea.
Okay, maybe we can talk about it more offline.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ms. Thomas Moore.
On page 5 of 12, under 7, it says, students who have an IEP or 504 plan, as of the date of the board's approval of any attendance area changes. I think we should strike the language that puts a particular date in there, because if there is a backlog within the system for parents to get a 504 or to get an IEP for their child, I don't want them to be in trouble, so to speak, because we've put a particular date in here.
Understood.
Okay. And on the same page under 8, we say, by residents of Howard County or others during the board deliberations. Who are others?
Item 8 on 5 of 12.
Yes, 5 of 12, new 8, last sentence, it says, or others during the board's deliberations. Who are others?
I can get clarity on that for you.
Okay.
One stipulation I believe that encounters is we do have students that we bus other places and students that are bused in. So, but we'll get clarification on who the others are for you.
Okay, thank you. On page 9 of 12, the new J, we're saying opportunities to ensure that all individuals are engaged. As much as we may like to hope that we have that much control over other individuals, we don't. I think we need to leave the language more about providing opportunities that will allow all individuals to be engaged in the process.
Okay.
And I believe my colleague mentioned this a bit as well. As far as looking at capacity, we know within the system there's a difference between state capacity and local capacity, and making sure that we're consistent with whichever one we're discussing throughout the document. And on the implementation procedures, on page 2 of 6, new E as in Edward, the last sentence says, and planning issues to the board and interested residents. So the full thing reads, the superintendent designee presents projections, attendance area considerations, and planning issues to the board and interested residents. What and who will it be decided which interested residents will be getting this information? I mean, I could see the superintendent or the designee going on a 3-year tour throughout the county in order to do that. And I don't think that was the intent of the language.
I don't believe so. Well, we would hope that all residents would be interested in the process, but it's a very good point. Thank you.
Just looking out for you, Dr. Martorano. Okay, that's all oh, and on page 4 of 6, under new K, the underlined section in the end, we speak about specific transition steps or a transition plan will be offered for students and families that are being reassigned. If we could define, put those in the definition. And last, looking at the diagram in the back, it looks as though it says, does the plan adopted by the board differ from the superintendent's proposed attendance area adjustment plan? No. And then it automatically becomes a board final attendance area adjustment plan and no public testimony. Is that true that there's no, or is this trying to oversimplify? Or so where, I guess my question is, if the board adopts the superintendent's proposed attendance area adjustment plan, when in that process are the public hearings?
The public hearings would always come after the submission of the superintendent's plan. So there will always be a public hearing at that point. What this is trying to clarify is if the board makes no changes and just adopts the superintendent's plan, there's, per the new law, there's not a requirement to have an additional public hearing.
Okay.
So there will always be a public hearing after the superintendent's plan is presented.
If we are going to utilize this graphic, and I think graphics are fabulous, then I think we need to put in there somewhere that there would be, because looking at it now, it looks as though there is no public hearing on that, and I know that that is not our intent.
Yes, ma'am. We'll confirm with the policy office if this is supposed to, or intended to be in the policy, or was provided for board clarification, and we'll provide that clarification to you.
Okay, and I think that's all for now. Thank you very much again for your work on this, all three
Yes,
of
ma'am.
you and everybody else.
Okay, Ms. Cutroneo?
Sort of going on with what Ms. Watts was saying about just a priority list or a weighting. I think the weighting is kind of impossible, but under 3B, I do think it's capacity utilization is what drives a redistricting decision. It's like our funding, it's all of that. So I don't know if there's a way to say that this is I think we can all agree that the primary driver of going through a redistricting is our capacity utilization. I don't know, trying to weight all the other things, I think that would be very complicated, but I do think that we should have language that what drives the decision, the most important is capacity utilization. That comes down to how we get funded, how we get buildings built. So I do think that is, we should, I don't know if my colleagues will agree, but I think that there should be language to indicate that so that the community understands what is going to drive this. It's a momentous decision to undergo redistricting, and I think that we should be clear in what is going to drive that decision. And then all these other factors come into play when we are redistricting for capacity. We're going to look at these other things to mitigate balancing other issues. Am I making myself clear? I feel like I'm rattling on.
I believe you are. I do want to.
I'm sure you've had many conversations about this in your policy committee.
Yes, and I think what you're getting at is that whether it's weighted or not, there is a driving factor, and the utilization is one of the primary, if not the primary, and that it should be made clear to the community.
Or opening a new school. I mean, it's that.
Correct, whatever the primary is.
Right.
I do want to note that under Section 4, Responsibilities, B, it does say that the Board of Education will define the proposed scope and identify which standards noted in Section 3A of the policy prompted the attendance area review for the upcoming. So that is a point in which the scope and what factors are the priorities or prompted can be communicated to the community.
You're done? Okay, Ms. Mallo?
So I have two small things. One is I request that the board support this being sent to outside counsel for review. And the point being specifically to the counsel who had previously successfully defended the school board in our cases around, our legal cases around redistricting. Since we need to be able to actively support why we're making the decisions. I wouldn't want to make significant changes to the policy that aren't defensible, knowing the experiences that we've gone through in the past. So that's my first thing. And then my second is that I do not support the idea of inclusion of development polygons because most of the time development polygons, that idea are going to new developments, and most of the citizens coming into those polygons are recent, a lot of times they're recent immigrants, they're people coming to the county for the first time, and I think it is an inherently exclusionary type of system that isn't consistent with the values of welcoming and being supportive of we're a whole school system. So I do want, if those are being considered, I would like those to be kind of individually voted upon as part of the policy or not as part of the policy. So, thank you.
Okay, and Dr. Lu.
Thank you. I have a question about the implementation procedure regarding attendance area committee. So for the track changes word is page 5 of 6, section 3. So that is under A.2, it says at least one member from each of the HCPSS 6 planning regions. I'm not familiar with the planning region. So do you have some information that can send to us so we can have a better understanding?
Yes, ma'am, we'll take a look at that. We
Okay.
know there are the 5 electoral regions. We'll look at this and provide information.
Okay, yeah, because during the 2019 redistricting process, we have noticed that there's no AC representative from probably District 5, Marist Ridge High School, now we don't really see the representation, and also River Hill High School. So I support have a diverse community so we can hear voices from each area of the community and also from each group, because it's very important that we hear each other. It's okay, people have different opinion, different perspective, but it's important that we listen to each other and at least have a chance to voice out, because last time we don't really see representation from District 5 and no Asian American representatives. So I hope that in the future we'll see a more diverse community. And then do we need to include any language about the diversity of the attendance area committee? But I will defer to your expertise and recommendations.
Understood.
So-
We can definitely look at that, and as it is a advisory committee to the superintendent, we'll work with the superintendent on that language.
Yeah, thank you, because I would expect this region to be an emotional process, because we all love our schools, nobody want to leave their school, but we want to hear all the voices, make sure that we reach out to community. Dr. Mataran, are you trying to tell me? Okay, because I see. Okay, yeah. Yeah, and about Ms. Delmont Small's suggestion to have a polygon for new development. So I will just use my community as an example. So our community was a new community when we moved in. We were really close to Clarksville Elementary School and Clarksville Middle School, but we are pretty large development. We have 88 houses, so when we move in, we know that we're going to Philadelphia Ridge and Foley Quarter, even though it's further away. But because we're new, we don't know anyone in the community, so when there, we really love the schools. So I think for us, it worked out perfectly, because, I mean, we don't have, otherwise we may overcrowd Clarksville Elementary School and Clarksville Middle School. So to me, I think it's a good experiences, because we're all new, and then we go to a school that has capacity, and we enjoy the experiences. Yeah, so I just want to show my perspective. Thank you.
Ms. Thomas Moore. You have 3 minutes.
Oh, wow, that's a lot. On page 8 of 12, under definitions A, an idea, attendance area adjustment plan, an idea or suggestion? Isn't it a plan that changes?
You want to address that?
I think we didn't want to repeat the word plan.
You know,
in the
as I
word
said that,
and in
I
the
was thinking that
definition.
too,
Yeah.
because I'm like, yeah, okay, so we
It's
can.
a tough one.
We can talk about that one
Sure.
at a later point in time. The other question, I'll do it offline. How about that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see other hands raised, so, yeah. Dr. Marano, please.
Not sure whether they keep pushing this button or not. I'm intrigued by Ms. Mallo's request or consideration for review by outside legal counsel, and upon just a quick reflection of that, I think that is a very prudent thing to do. With that said, if that is the board's will to follow that recommendation, how would that change the timeline that you have outlined in the presentation, and when would that review occur? Because it would have to happen with some considerations from this coming forward to the board before the final action of the board, I would assume, because that would be a question that they would want to Would you have to adjust your timeline that we have presented to the board tonight if that would be a consideration?
We could take a look at that. The public hearing is on November 2nd, and the second report and action don't come back until November 7th, so we do have a little time before that. We might be able to have the outside review take place within that time frame.
And the only, if the board were to consider that, the variable that we cannot control is their availability, right?
I think there are 2 points, right? First, the board need to finish this discussion. That's the version the legal counsel will review, right?
Yep.
They will bring back, say, okay, whether the final version compliant with law, right? If it's not, the board need to reconsider the discussion. right?
Exactly, but that would blow out your timeline a little bit further. So I'd like staff to consider that,
Sure.
if that'd be okay.
Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, try to talk and think about that, and we'll try to make arrangement on that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see other hands raised. Let's close the discussion on this. And thank you, Mr. Lubely and Ms. Bubenko. Sorry.